Hello everybody, Slasher9 here. Welcome to another video. We're doing another episode today. Today we're doing the ranked games. And today we're ranking the Final Fantasy franchise. This is my favorite franchise. Square Enix is my favorite game company. And we're going to be ranking the Final Fantasy games. Now these are the console games. This has nothing to do with the sub-series. Has nothing to do with the MMOs or any of those kinds of games. It's got something to do with the actual games of the series, not the Mystical Quest series. It's got to be the original series. So I got 13 original games. So while we going, let's get started. Let's start with the obvious couple of ones. Number 13, Final Fantasy V. I hate Final Fantasy V with a passion. Sometimes, in order to spawn a save point, you have to defeat a boss or some other kind, a super boss known as Omega Mark III. Now, Omega Weapon originally I believe, was in Final Fantasy IV, and I think he was souped up in Final Fantasy V. I could be wrong, but yeah, sometimes you actually have to beat him in order to spawn a save point. And Final Fantasy V is the leveling system is the same way in Final Fantasy II. You don't level up from the monsters; you level up from your jobs, and that's just horrendous. All in all, I really dislike the game. Number 12. I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but it's my list, my opinion. Final Fantasy 12. I was not a huge fan of the battle system. I like action. I like where you actually get to choose what you want to do, but not where you actually have to go into a time bar and pause the game and choose certain commands. I don't really like that too much. Not my kind of game. Number 11. I'm going to put number 11 number 10 together pretty much, even though they're 11 and 10. They're pretty much the exact same in a way, except one's a little bit different. Final Fantasy 2. Final Fantasy 2 was the first Final Fantasy game where you level up from your jobs. Final Fantasy 3, not so much, but Final Fantasy 3 story was not as good, while Final Fantasy 2 actually had a decent story, but a horrible, horrendous leveling system. Number 9, Final Fantasy 4. Final Fantasy 4 is a hard game, but it's absolutely enjoyable, and it's pretty fun, in my opinion. Very, very fun game. Easy to get into the story, but it's definitely difficult. Number 8, Final Fantasy 15. I beat this game in less than a week. Just story based, and I'll be the first to tell you, out of any 3D Final Fantasy game, I was not pleased. Story was actually not bad. Gameplay was okay. Cast of characters was okay. But just the battle system, I just hated. Alright, number 7. I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but oh well. Final Fantasy 7. Final Fantasy 7 is the true first ever 3D Final Fantasy game. It was the game that moved Square Enix to the PlayStation instead of putting it on with Nintendo. Well, Final Fantasy VII is not bad. It's a pretty good game. Storyline is very good. The amount of bosses in the game, the leveling system's great. The only one issue that I really do not like about the game is sort of the cast of characters. You have Cloud, who is an ex-Marine, Tifa, you have a Flower Girl, you have Barret, you have Sephiroth, who's the main villain in the game. You have I think it's Red Dragon, the 13. Vincent, I'm pretty sure, is in the game. There's a good amount of cast of characters, but I'm just not a huge fan of it. Number 6, Final Fantasy 13. Final Fantasy 13 was not bad. Out of any of the 13 subgenres, 13-2, 13-3, the first one is far the best. When it comes to Final Fantasy 13, it takes a long time to get into the story. It takes about 5 to 6 hours to really get into the story. And yeah, it just sucks. The leveling system is okay. The battles are super fast and they're super fun. The cast of characters are pretty good. But the leveling system is okay. The equipping and upgrading the weapons is not bad. And you can upgrade your accessories, which is really fun too. Number 5, Final Fantasy 1. By far, possibly one of the hardest games in the franchise. I have beaten it only one time. I've never faced the Warmach, so I've always wanted to do that. But Final Fantasy 5 is a hard game in its own right, depending on which version you play. If you play the PSP version, just letting you know, the PSP version is a complete remake of the PS1 version. And that is the exact, and I can't even talk. The PS1 version was a remake of the original one. You can easily find them in the anthology versions. Number 4, Final Fantasy 6. Final Final Fantasy VI is among fans to be the greatest Final Fantasy ever made. I beg to differ that. While Final Fantasy VI had one of the greatest villains of all time, Kefka, but also had some of the greatest storylines in the game, had a great battle system, great leveling system, great equipping system, and a huge cast of characters. It's a very enjoyable game. My only downfall is the time it takes to actually reach the super bosses. That is the only downfall I do not like about the game. Number 3, Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII is a great game. It has a great storyline, great cast of characters. It has a great leveling system, like battle system. Not leveling system, sorry, battle system. I absolutely love the battle system. The only problem I hate is the GF leveling and equipping system. Literally, your Guardian Forces is the reason why that you actually have to equip certain things to certain this and certain that. Yeah, I did not like that too much. It's a very, very simple game, even to the point where you don't even have to level up in the game. Literally, you don't even have to level up. You could literally just use Guardian Forces to make your character be, 9,999 HP and have everything, and you only have to level up. Pretty sweet. Number 2. Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite PS1 game. And to me is the greatest Final Fantasy game besides the one I'm about to talk about here in a little bit. Great storyline. I love the equipping system. They actually really changed it from Final Fantasy VIII, and I'm so glad they did. Huge cast of characters, and very funny. A lot of different worlds, a lot of great bosses in the game, and really one of the only main... There's not too many games that go back into medieval times for Final Fantasy, and this is one of them that actually did it really well. Okay, so I gotta name some honorable mentions down the road, and I have 5 honorable mentions. I'm just gonna say the names out loud and clear in blue. Final Fantasy IV After Years, Final Fantasy Mystical Quest, Final Fantasy X-2, Final Fantasy 13-2, and the last one is on I believe it's the Game Boy. I think it's Final Fantasy Legend. Yeah. Number 1, Final Fantasy X. This is by far my most favorite Final Fantasy game, my favorite Final Fantasy game in the series, my favorite PS2 game of all time, and possibly maybe right second, maybe first in line to be my favorite game of all time. It's right there. It's literally right there. Great cast of characters. Great storyline. Great leveling system. Great battle system. I mean, what more could you ask for? The only bad thing is at the end of the game, there's a cliffhanger. Like, it's not, like, you really don't see it, but you can tell, like, at the end of the video, spoiler alert, but still just want to let you know, at the end of the game, you can really tell there's a cliffhanger, even though it doesn't really propose it, but there is a cliffhanger. Great bosses in the game. Like I said, great leveling system. It's been, released on multiple different consoles. PS2, PS3, PS Vita, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, PS5, PS4. I mean, that's 7 different consoles this game has been released on. To this day, I still think that is the best-selling Final Fantasy game. Maybe. I could be wrong. I mean, it sold over 6 million on the PS2? And as far as I know, from the PS Vita and the PS3 ports, it sold over 1 million. I don't know how much it sold on the Switch and the PS4, Xbox One. I don't know how much it sold on there, but I really don't know. But that is my list. I actually had it all written down. But yes, that is my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. I absolutely adore it. If y'all are into Final Fantasy, tell me what your favorite Final Fantasy is, or give me your top 13 or top 10, whatever the top video or top any Final Fantasy game you have. Let me know in the comments. You can also watch more videos at www.youtube.com/slowshow9. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.